Hey, welcome back to Brighter Rays. Our study this week has been called Two Nations because we're looking at Jacob and Esau here and their birth and the first story that we get of them with the selling of the birthright. And that's in Genesis chapter 25. So hopefully you read Genesis chapter 25, you got it down, you know what's going on. So let's conclude our study today with just a few thoughts. Now, there's a lot more in this passage that we could talk about. There's a lot that really, you could tear this apart for weeks and weeks. There's a lot of stuff going on there and stuff that the rest of the Bible connects to here as well. But let me just give you a few parting thoughts on this chapter. Look at Isaac and Ishmael and Jacob and Esau. Both sinners, and yet they would follow different paths in life. What was the cause of them following different paths? Was it because they're like, wow, this is really the best way to go? Or one was more holy than another. One was really, really good person and the other one was just a bad person. Do we see that here? What caused the separation between the two nations here? The answer is God. That's it, really. We've seen this over and over in Genesis. This has been a reoccurring theme. Why is it one person and not the other? It's always God's intervention. It's always God's choice. His favor is what changes the person. The Children's Catechism question asks, what is a change of heart called? The answer? Regeneration. God must regenerate the heart so that a person might choose to follow Him. Sure, they'll make their own free choices. They're not robots. They're not automatons. They still make their own choices, but their will is something different. The will to follow God or to despise Him begins with God's choice. You can't choose to follow God unless He's chosen you. As Frank Hall said, there are only two kinds of people in this world, Jacobs and Esaus. These two men represent the entire human race. Jacob represents God's elect, and Esau represents the reprobate. Jacob is loved by God, and Esau is hated by God. Because Jacob was loved by God, God sent His Son into the world to redeem him from his sins. Christ died for Jacob. Jacob will struggle throughout his life, but in the end, he will call the Lord his God. That's the difference. The difference is Christ or God's choice. That's the difference. You cannot look at Jacob's life. And I talked with many people about this. Like, you look at Jacob, that guy, he's a liar, he's a cheat, he deceives people, he puts himself in front of his family and other people. The guy is really a piece of work. He's a sinner. He's a good sinner. And so why is he chosen? Why is he different? Why at the end of his life does he finally say, Yahweh is my God? Not just, Yahweh is the God of my father, Abraham and Isaac. He finally confesses that Yahweh is his God. Why is that? What made the difference in his heart? What changed his soul? It was God's choice, and that's what God says. It was me. It's me all along. So, we look at our own lives and how, if you are a follower of Christ, how did you come to follow Christ? Well, we usually go back, back when I was first grade, I heard the gospel preached by someone, and then I was thinking about it, and I chose to follow Christ. Or, I was sitting in a service one night, and the preacher said, come on down here if you want to give your life to Christ, come to the front of the church and pray and receive Christ now. And so I got up and I was like, hey, that makes sense to me. And I went down, I was crying, all this kind of, you've heard the stories before. But people are like, well, I chose to follow. Really? You did. That's true. You did choose to follow Christ. But why did you choose to follow Christ? Was it because you're smarter than other people? Is it because you're better looking than other people? It's because you just got this thing figured out better than other people. Is that it? You know, is there some kind of X factor about you that makes you like, oh wow, you know, I got this thing figured out, but all these other people are just, you know, foolish. They don't understand. They don't understand who God is. But I got God figured out. Was that the thing that changed you? No. What changed you is regeneration. It is God's choice to come to you, change your heart, to make your heart even alive, and to forgive you, to justify you. And then you're like, wow, I need to follow Christ. That's what happens. You know, so we want to make sure we don't place our will over God's will, because that's wrong. We can't do that. The Bible doesn't allow us to do that. Nothing can thwart God's will. So if my will can do that, then I'm not thinking correctly. I need to remember that my choices that I made were only after God's choices, because what did He choose? You know, in eternity, in timelessness. So my choices in time do not trump His choices. My choices in 2000 whatever are not going to change His mind or change the course of history or anything else like that, because God chose before He created anything. Before time began, God had His choices done. So you need to think rightly about that. That's how the Bible talks about it. You choose, yeah, I choose to follow Christ. I chose to follow Christ back in 1985. But He chose me first. And so all glory goes to Him. I can't boast in my choice to follow Him, because the only reason why I follow Him is because He chose me to be His child. That's the truth. I know people struggle with that because they want to be able to say, well, I chose to follow Christ. Well, you did. You can say that, but you got to remember that He chose you first. He changed you first before you decided to follow Him. Before you walked that aisle or whatever you did, you know, that's not what saved you. It was He who saved you. It was God who saved you. So yeah, I could talk about that all day, but you get the idea. So that's the end of our study of Genesis chapter 25. Next time we'll be moving on to the next chapter, chapter 26, and see what God would have us to know about Him and to know about ourselves.